morning to all of you pigeons. Good morning to the sun. Has anybody seen Eddie lately? I haven't seen him since the weather turned cold. He was looking for some coats for his daughters. I don't think they were more than 8 years old. Said he might just hop a freight train down to Memphis, look for gold and put his kids in school. He knows every spot along that mighty Mississippi. He loves the power and the smell in the air. Craves the power and the smell in the air. You might find him under a bridge in the morning, on a park bench somewhere, on the outskirts of the train yard, anywhere out in the open air. He thinks he has a sister out in Utah. He'd give anything to see her again. Been 15 years since he left the foster home, with his backpack and his dreams and a gun. His backpack, a dream, and a gun. Beyond that, he don't know where he came from. Don't know nothing about a mom or a dad. He don't look like a scholar. He wrote a book, he wrote a textbook of sad. He's writing a textbook of sad. He knows the sun is still up there. He follows its path, its run. And he knows one thing that most people don't. The sun sets on everyone. That sun sets on everyone. Sun sets on everyone. Anybody seen Eddie lately? I haven't seen him since the weather turned cold. This is a hybrid, I guess, song, tune, not a song. Close enough. That wasn't entirely mine. I borrowed a chunk of that from an old hymn called How Firm a Foundation, which is got a great melody to it, an early Americana sort of melody that I love. So I cheated. Made a monster. I read a lot of American history. I read a lot of exploration of. I talked about this a couple months ago. Exploration of the American West. I kind of spent a lot of time out west, and I love it. And I love reading about this stuff. It's endlessly fascinating. Literally, almost everything that I look at, and a lot of it is stuff that the average person has no idea even exists, was even written, which itself is. Fascinating, or tragic, and the connections. One of the interesting things is the connections between different people involved in these explorations, individuals who were members of different exploring parties in many cases. And the different, it's hard to piece it together because there are a lot of people involved, of course, over a good chunk of time, 100 years or whatever. And but I find it very interesting doing that. I mean, if you read one account of a particular survey, and then you become familiar with the individuals who were on that survey, and then you see their same names when you read about other explorations and other surveys. And then you realize when you read that these individuals have gone through more than one ordeal in many cases, because many of these things were ordeals. They were either ordeals. They were ordeals on a number of levels: physical suffering, hardship. If you read between the lines, like ordeals, and probably in terms of logistics, maintaining these things. So I'm talking like but before the Civil War mostly, some after, but mostly before. And I talked a little bit about this previously. One guy. Well, how many people have ever heard of Howard Stansbury? Does that ring? Zero? Yeah. Right. Okay. Case in point, one of the coolest books I think I have ever read, and I'm reading it again, parts of it, is Howard Stansbury, who's a military guy, was charged with the exploration, the first thorough exploration and survey of the Great Salt Lake. In 1849, they started, and it went through 1849, 1850. It took them about, they had to overwinter in Salt Lake City, so it took them about a year, roughly. And his right-hand man was a guy that I mentioned before, a guy named Lieutenant John Gunnison, and he was, it was a sort of a two-pronged effort to do this survey, and Stansbury was in charge of the one, and Gunnison was in charge of the other prong of this. Gunnison later was killed. I talked about this. 4 years later, he was killed out in remote southwestern Utah by a band of Pavant or Paiute Indians. And well, I'll cut this short instead of going into all this detail. The really cool thing about Stansbury's book, first of all, he's a great writer. He's an excellent writer, and he in this book he accounts the entire travels from when they left St. Louis and sailed, of course, up part of the Missouri, but then departed quickly and went up the Kansas River, and then northwest and intercepted the Platte and took the Platte River up across Nebraska and Wyoming. And then from there, sort of cross country, across South Pass and the Continental Divide, and down into the Great Salt Lake Basin. He describes the whole thing. So in 1849, one of the things that is amazing to me is just how much happened in that 5-year span of time, from 1845 to 1850. Just incredible changes in this country. And Stansberry, because of the timing, documents a lot of this stuff that's going on in the country at the time, including the great exodus, migration west. So he talks a lot about the wagon trains and the breakdowns of the wagon trains and the stuff that just gets jettisoned by these wagon train parties who realize they can't carry all this stuff. They're not going to make it. And the Mormons. So the Mormons, 1847 was the big Mormon migration to the Salt Lake Valley. So they arrived just 2 years into that, just 2 years after that. And so they were really the first ones documenting the whole Mormon, which is a amazing episode in American history. And it's not really all that well known, but it's incredible reading. And then Native American stuff, a whole bunch of that. Okay. Didn't come for a lecture, right? Gunnison was killed 4 years after this survey. This survey itself of the Great Salt Lake is just it's a page turner. Every single day of that thing was just like, you can't believe it. I mean, they almost several times came close to perishing for lack of water. Nobody had been around the western, if you know the Great Salt Lake, the western and southwestern side, the Bonneville Salt Flats is what people know of. But it is as desolate as any place you will find on the planet. There is nothing out there. There's nothing growing. There's no plants. It's all mud and salt, basically. And for miles, huge areas. I broke down out there once in my Yugo. I was driving across I-80. In the winter, I was trying to make it to Ohio, where I'm from California, and I broke down just very near the Bonneville Salt Flats, just a few miles from there, east of the Nevada-Utah line in the winter. And it was cold. I mean, the wind just howls across there. Unfortunately, I was able to get my car started the next... Oh, well, so much for the song. I was able to get my car miraculously running the next morning. I didn't think I had any hope at all, but I put a light bulb in the radiator, a light bulb for my flashlight in the radiator to hold the valve open so I could, and I made it. But anyway, it's a desolate place, and they almost died several times. And just reading this stuff, Gunnison himself suffered greatly because he was actually carted out most of the way on a spring cart because he had some terrible case of either cholera or dysentery or some combination of the two most of the way out there. And it's amazing stuff. Thank you. This song, excuse me, this song is weather related, but not about the extreme cold. It's called Maple Sugar Snow. And since we are halfway through winter and halfway till spring, it's going to be time for maple sugaring. And I once heard a wonderful expression from someone from Minnesota who meant to say, hey, look, it's no big deal. We can all get through it, whatever. And he said, hey, it's just maple sugar snow. I thought, oh, man, I got to figure out what that means, because that sounds like a song title. It's the season of the lion and the lamb, and the weather is sneaky. One day you're out there working on your tan, and then it's bitter cold and freaky, and the builders and the architects have nightmares about mud up to their necks. And the maple trees are giving up their wine to be boiled down like whiskey. Taps and buckets hanging patiently, but the weather makes it risky. The warm weather starts to flow, but everything just stops with maple sugar snow. Oh, maple sugar snow. It's the one that makes you wonder, where did springtime go? The one that stops the flow, but it's only there for a day or so. Maple sugar snow. Well begun is halfway home. I kissed her on the equinox. We used the extra daylight savings hour to share toys in a sandbox, but cold weather closed us down, and I was forced to wear the crown. But I learned a lesson vivid to this day about rushing into things. Enthusiasm really is okay, but remember maple sugaring when something stops your flow. Maybe it's just maple sugar snow. Oh, maple sugar snow. It's the one that makes you wonder, where did springtime go? The one that stops the flow, but it's only there for a day or so. Maple sugar snow. Maple sugar snow. But dig this, there's an unexpected chill on each crocus and daffodil. Peepers in the bogs stop turning into frogs. Redbud and forsythia get cardiac arrhythmias. The baseball games are called off. They're freezing their bats and balls off. Maple sugar snow. It's the one that makes you wonder, where did springtime go? The one that stops the flow.
but it's only there for a day or so. Maple sugar snow. Maple sugar snow. Thank you. A bit of homespun philosophy.